This is Dan Schneider. On this Dan Schneider video interview, the subject will be the careers of Laurel and Hardy, the 20th century American comedy film team. Kip Harness is the expert, and I'll be talking with him in a moment. Kip Harness is my guest. KipHarness.net is his website. He's a singer, he's a writer. He's written a few books about comedy. I had him on a while back talking about Charlie Chaplin, and he's back to talk about the careers of Laurel and Hardy. So Kip, welcome again. And if you can tell me a little bit just about yourself for people who haven't seen you before, and then your interest in Laurel and Hardy, how it got stoked, and the book that you wrote.
Well, thanks, Dan. I'm a singer-songwriter. I put out 13 albums of my stuff, and I did write the Laurel and Hardy book, and before that, the Charlie Chaplin book, or after that, I should say. And I just come out with a novel this year that was published here in Canada that has been getting really cool reviews, and I perform. And I also wrote this book about Laurel and Hardy that I started out kind of as a challenge to myself to look at all their films and write about them, just because from an early age I really related to something that I thought was special in their comedy and in their films. I think even the from television, but also in school we had a thing where the teachers would show their stuff on the last day of school before Christmas on the auditorium wall. And just the experience of that, probably a lot of kids were over laughing because they're glad to get out of school. But, just the sound of the laughter and just the purity of their comedy, from a really early age drew me in. So I'm a lifelong fan. So,
well, let me ask you about, I know when you talked about Oliver Hardy, you're talking sort of the more about the comedy, the physical routines. Laurel and Hardy started out as individual comedians in the silent era before they hooked up. Well, what about their chemistry do you think sets them apart from some of the silent stars that have been forgotten, like people they worked with, like Charlie Chase or other people?
well, I think that they're both really, really talented actors, but they did have this chemistry between them that set them up really well for also sound films. They're one of the few silent comedians who made a success in sound films. And one of the reasons because of that is they had each other to talk to. And they had this chemistry that was kind of magical in a way as it went on, the years went on. It's almost like two musicians who are playing the song, sometimes the same gag, same song over and over again, but they find these different new nuances and ways to play it, but they, almost had that telepathic thing together. And that's the thing, too, what you're saying, they made many, many films before they got together. Hardy made a lot more films because he was in demand as a character actor and a villain. And, Laurel was trying to be a star comedian from early on. But I don't find any of their films they made solo to be of much interest. I mean, Laurel, he tried several times to have a comedy series, but he just never clicked until he teamed up with Hardy. And same thing with Hardy. His films are okay. A lot of Stan Laurel solo films, I can't really even stand them, which is weird and strange because in the team films, I think that he's the greatest of comedians, but yeah, in the solo films, I've never been able to stand it.
Well, they did do a film where they appeared together, it looks like in 1921, but they weren't a team then, they were just separate actors.
That's right, yeah. Yeah, that was just a chance come together. Stan was doing another star comedy, and he needed they needed a villain, so they got Hardy in there, and they both knew each other for many years around the scene of films. But actually, one of the people, Joe Rock, who put Stan in a lot of the solo films, he has suggested using Hardy, and Stan didn't want him in the films because he was trying so hard to be this bright star comedian that he didn't want Hardy and to detract from his laughs that he was getting. And that The Lucky Dog was one where he allowed him to be used. And yeah, that's their first meeting on screen. But aside from that, there's nothing much special about it because they're two guys doing their own thing. And I think, as Laurel said later, they're two guys who are glad to have a job, any kind of job. And it wasn't until like 6 or 7 years later, like 1926, around that time, when they're both back at the Roach lot, that they kind of came together, you know, and that had come about as Stan had kind of failed so much in becoming a solo comedy. I mean, he had some acclaim, but as he said later on, he didn't rate his efforts very high, and he was trying to get more involved in his career, directing and writing films, and he didn't want to go back on screen. I don't know. The story is that Hardy was supposed to actually play a role, but he burned his hand cooking, so they put in Laurel instead. And in the next film, Hardy was in that film, and they thought that Laurel did well performing, so he continued to perform, and that's how they came together in subsequent films. Slowly, you know, this team was built, you know.
A lot of people don't recognize that Stan Laurel, his real name was Arthur Jefferson, and he was from England. And you talked about how so many people didn't make the transition from silent to sound films. Yet Stan Laurel had an odd accent. It wasn't really British. I mean, the on-screen persona. It wasn't really British. It wasn't really American. It was just something weird all of its own. Did he affect that voice, or was that his natural speaking voice?
I think his voice, he pitched his voice a bit higher in the film. So his voice was lower in real life, and he pitched it a bit higher to give him that kind of vulnerable, otherworldly sound that the character had. But yeah, I as a child, when I would watch them, I would always wonder, what is Stan? What kind of accent is he speaking with? Is he English? Where do they? Why do they wear their derbies? Are they like Charlie Chaplin? And is he British like Charlie Chaplin? I didn't quite understand, but yeah, it's a strange Northern England accent combined with a bunch of years of being in California, I think.
And Hardy was from the American South, and as far as I can tell, he didn't really have a noticeable Southern accent of any sort. Did he also affect his on-screen voice?
No, he didn't affect it that much, except that, well, he does have a Southern accent, if you do listen, but it's a particular type of a strain of Southern accent that some of the syllables is almost like booklet, like he goes, instead of, I'm trying to think of an example, but it's that sort of idea of the, you know, ER sound, metamorphosing into the I sound, you know. I'm trying to think of an example now, but it's like, what would be a word that would show that up? Foist, you know, he would say something like that. This is the first time that you've ever done anything right, you know, instead of first, you know, like a certain strain of accent. But in terms of his speaking and things like that, he kind of he found his character in overemphasizing the sort of Southern gentlemanliness and Southern idea of dignity and all that kind of stuff. And he'd been brought up that way, and apparently he was like that in real life, but he just exaggerated that much more for his persona, being this pompous guy, but thinks he knows everything, but really doesn't know anything. And so both their voices were distinctive, and really worked out well. And both the voices reflect a certain gentleness on the part of the two guys too. You know, that was really important to their screen personas, I think.
Now, Laurel came from the same kind of background as Chaplin, the music house background, which is sort of the British version of vaudeville. But Hardy, as you said, was basically an actor. Did Hardy have any vaudeville training?
He had no stage training at all. Like, I mean, in terms of, not at all. He never played comedy on vaudeville the way all the other great comedians did. For a while he had a singing career, and he had a beautiful voice, that's tenor voice, I think, that's in several of the films that you can hear. So he did sing on stage a bit, but then he just went down to Florida, where they had, I think, the Lubin Film Studios, that he started playing parts and doing anything around. It was kind of like a Wild West scenario where you could come in and be this, you know, put together props or be an extra, and he worked his way in the film. And so in every way, his whole acting style was entirely formed by films and acting in films. So people do notice that there's an instinctive knowing of the camera that he shows when he's on screen. All these tiny, small gestures, and that kind of minimalism in the acting. I mean, it's comic acting. And it's broad comic acting in some ways, but in other ways, yeah, a lot of people notice these. I think Woody Allen famously said that Hardy is the better screen actor than Laurel. And he goes on and then I really give a lot of credit for Hardy in those early films, slowing Laurel down. Like Laurel had tried to put himself out there as a solo comedian, and in some ways, he's like smiling and showing his teeth and running around trying to be cute. It's kind of like Charlie Chaplin, and having that dynamic personality. But the character he formed with Hardy is not a dynamic character at all. It's like this slow-witted, dumb guy walking around doing things wrong and also very slowly. And I think that sense of pace, the slowing down of the comic tempo, I think a lot of that came from Hardy and his ability just to act and be himself on screen. Yeah, it's kind of almost very modern. It's not this frenetic craziness that, people associate rightly or wrongly with the Keystone old silent films. And, they're not dynamic characters like a Chaplin or a Lloyd or something. They're just two guys stumbling along in life.
Yeah, and often Hardy would sort of look at the camera, fumble with his tie, and go, and that he knew that the character knew that they were being watched, whereas Laurel, I think, had very few of those moments.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, it was always a special connection that Hardy had with the audience. Like, where did it come from? I don't know. But in a Laurel Hardy film, every so often, Hardy's going to turn and express his stuff dead right into the camera in close-ups. And share us in the experience that way of his frustration with his monumentally stupid partner. And that was another thing that I don't know, it comes out as free and easy, I think, relationship with the camera. Comedians have always looked at the camera. Chaplin did it as well, fleetingly. But he made it into a whole different language,
Yeah. Was there really a straight man in their duo? Because, I mean, there's lots of times when Hardy is the butt of some plan or some, mini revenge plot by the Laurel character. And he's not that much brighter, if at all, than Laurel as on-screen persona. Because when you think of Abbott and Costello, Abbott is clearly the straight man. Costello is the guy going for the laughs. But in Laurel and Hardy, it's more 50-50.
Yeah, it really is. It's like that's one of the contractions to the films. It's like the real richness of the characters and all that, And Hardy, apparently in private life, Hardy was a very modest person, and he actually believed that he was a straight man to Stan, and was there only to support Stan and support the laughs. But really, they're obviously. I mean, you can look at the films. When you're a child, when you first look at the film, there's always Laurel that you're watching. But then you get older and you see the films again and again. For some reason, for me, for a lot of people, they have this rewatch appeal, these films. Because of their slow and easy, kind of gentle pace and their revealing of the characters. But Hardy is as funny as Laurel, or perhaps more. I mean, Stan Laurel himself apparently felt that Hardy was funnier than him. Some of the stuff he does and the subtleties of what he does, and you look at it over and over, is really brilliant stuff. I mean, it's true that Stan is the obviously more comic character, but it's kind of in the same way as like Stan is merely also, when you look at the films more, he seems to be obviously the more stupid character, but he's actually not. As they thought, Hardy's the dumb guy. Who thinks he's smarter than the dumb guy, only he's dumber and he doesn't know it. I think that's how Hardy discussed his own character one time. And like in some ways, Hardy is dumber than Stan, and that's kind of the hilarity of it. You've got this guy staring into the camera, inviting you to share his disgust, but in the next second, he does something stupider. And, it's kind of a lot of comic possibilities.
I think more than any other comedy team, Laurel and Hardy sort of mind pathos, because last week I did a show with an expert on the Three Stooges, and in whatever incarnation, they were pretty much balls to the walls, violence, and going for the laugh, anything for a laugh. Whereas Laurel and Hardy seemed to often do sort of a slow simmer. Yes, they'd have some violence where they'd throw things at each other or slap one another around, but it was always a gentler kind of violence. They were never really going to hurt each other, whereas you didn't really know that with the Stooges.
Well, the attraction of the Stooges is that they are this complete, like you said, well, slapstick and sometimes insanely violent stuff. And then with Laurel and Hardy, the thing is, they're trying to be civil. They're trying to be civilized. They're trying to be gentle. But every so often, this violence outbreaks, and then they have to enter into this slow ritual of retribution that goes on in their films, because that even has to be dignified and slow and gentle, even when they're inflicting violence on each other. But yeah, I would say that's different. The Three Stooges or the Marx Brothers, they're not trying to be civil or gentle. They're just kind of coming in and throwing punches and doing crazy stuff. Laurel and Hardy are trying with all their might just to get ahead and be nice and be dignified. But then every so often they have to resort to this incredible violence, and that's the comedy of what they do.
And also with like the Three Stooges or the Marx Brothers that you mentioned, their characters seem to always be against other human characters. They're fighting against society. With Laurel and Hardy, I mean, yes, there are people who may bully them or put them down in the variety of their shorts and even in some of their feature-length films, but it always seems to me they have a more existential crisis. I mean, I forget the name of the film, but the famous one trying to move the piano up that long staircase. I mean, which one was it?
The Music Box.
The Music Box. And, when I think of, for example, Buster Keaton, he had problems with inanimate objects, but they were complex Rube Goldbergian situations he was in. Whereas in Laurel and Hardy, it's just very elemental. We got to get this heavy piano up this flight of 200 stairs or whatever it may be. And the humor comes from them not being able to do the most simple, basic things that most people could be able to handle. Did they particularly try to mine that sort of existential us against the simple things? And is that part of their enduring appeal?
Yeah, I would say that. Like a lot of their earlier films, they had their biggest success in the silent films with these crazy, like big business when they go and try and sell the Christmas trees, and it turns into this crazy riot where they're tearing down the guy's entire house. They did a lot of the early films. They did this violence and things against each other, and then in the early sound films, it seems to me, they settled upon this thing of them trying to do a simple task and mining that over and over, whether it's putting it up an aerial on a house or delivering a piano or cleaning a house or whatever. But one thing that strikes me really as well, the people, like in that film that you're talking about, The Music Box, aren't very pleasant people either. Like they're always dealing with this world full of like really harried, kind of angry, kind of unkind, mean people that are all around them, and they're like these two sorts of innocence. And in some ways, sometimes I think one of their appeals is that they kind of get to the child in this who, used to sit around and wonder, look at adults, and wonder why they're all stressed out and upset and tired and angry and tired all the time. A child in his innocence doesn't understand, But then when you become an adult, later you realize why people are so angry and tired, or you see that's the way things are. And with Laurel and Hardy, that's what's not really understood to me about their comedies a lot, is they created this whole world around them, all of their foils were these angry people. And it's kind of, in some ways, it's kind of an edgy kind of critique of humanity, Like they're walking around, they're trying to do their best. Everybody's kind of like psychotic or mad or impatient or angry with them all the time, So it's not just the two characters, it's this world they've created around themselves as well. That, in the later films, when they didn't have control of their own films, and later on in their demise, sort of, with the big studios, that's what was also missing from the films, is that they weren't able to create this world around them. They were thrust into some approximation of what we believe to be our own world.
We mentioned Abbott and Costello and the Marx Brothers, and both Abbott and Costello are both known for their verbal humor. Dozens of the classic skits, the Susquehanna Hat Company and Who's on First and whatnot. And the Marx Brothers, especially really just Groucho, is known for his sort of verbal pyrotechnics and the misunderstanding of words. Yet in the sound films, Laurel and Hardy often had exchanges between themselves. Their humor was somewhat different, though. It wasn't. It wasn't. You didn't have to be smart or hip to get their humor. What what was sort of the basis of a scene, a comic scene between Laurel and Hardy that differed from, say, the Marxes or Abbott and Costello? They seem to sort of almost stumble in more naturally, because you knew when a scene in like Who's on First came up, you knew from the first exchange we were in some artificial kind of world, no matter how great it was. Same thing with Groucho when he was, ragging on Margaret Dumont and she was clueless. Oh, this is where Groucho's going to get her. But with Laurel and Hardy, you seem to almost just sort of come naturally into, they come upon a stump of wood, or they'd see an animal or something, and something would unravel out of that. How did they build those kinds of comic scenes?
Well, what you're saying about the difference between them and the other guys, Abbott and Costello, they mostly, and that's one of the great things Abbott and Costello did, all those routines are all burlesque routines,
Yeah.
that have been lost to history or whatever. If Abbott and Costello hadn't done them and redone them over and over, and they did them excellently, they did the best that they're ever going to be done. And the same thing with the Marx Brothers. They had most of their routines there from Broadway, and their first films were replications of their Broadway show. And then after that, they ran out of the Broadway shows. They brought in writers to replicate, that feeling of their Broadway shows. But Laurel and Hardy are entirely filmic creations. They're entirely creatures of film. That's where they, And so in their films, as they said many times, a lot of their best films were simply made. There are two pieces of paper with just some ideas, and they would go in front of the cameras and improvise. Really, they would have a general outline. But that accounts for that kind of lackadaisical, kind of organic feeling of the film. Like you were saying, they stumble upon something and they see what develops from there. A lot of their short films, they developed out of the thing of like they'd come up with a thing and say, okay, we're going to have them go on a picnic, and then we're going to film some stuff at the house, and then they're going to go and have the picnic. And as it turned out, the film ends up, they found enough gags of them trying to simply get out of the house for the picnic and never getting to it, that's what the entire film is. And it goes on and on and on. And that's what happened with many of their films. They'd have a write-up where it was, big business, where they're supposed to sell the Christmas trees. They had the idea that they're going to many different houses. They just did the whole film. And a lot of people consider it to be a masterpiece, not just of their comedy, but silent film. They did the whole film at the one house with their foil, James Finlayson. So their writings would just consist, there was very little rehearsal, run to keep things spontaneous. The films just would consist of a general outline, and if they felt they could mine the gags enough out of that to make the 2 reels or 20 minutes, then they did. And I feel that there's a special atmosphere to the film that has that free and easy feel where it could be improvised, and it has an organic feel also, because unlike a lot of or most films that are made, they shot their films in sequence, and they did that because they know it was very particular to their form of comedy, and it wouldn't work otherwise. But it can be very costly to shoot films in sequence because you've got the set, right? But that's what they did, and so they created them as they went along in sequence too, and they were able to preserve that at least to some degree into the sound era, as the movies became more expensive and the features, of course, things couldn't be so spontaneously done. But I think that was their approach, and that was the unique charm of their comedy as it ends up in a filmic way.
That's interesting that you mentioned that they shot it sequentially, which is very odd. But I think that would help them, though, put themselves in the mindset of the characters more realistically, that you could get that organic thing, so that you didn't have the thing where, Groucho's wiggling his eyebrows at the camera and talking, where it's an artifice. No matter how well done, it's an artifice. But let me talk about the size and the physical appearance of the two men. When I spoke with my Three Stooges expert last week, I had mentioned that it's rarely commented upon that the Stooges were very short men. Even Curly, who was rotund and fat, Shemp was the tallest Stooge at like 5'6". The rest of them were like 5'3" or 5'4". But Oliver Hardy was a big man. I mean, I think he was at least 6 foot or taller. He was obviously, you know, very overweight. Laurel too was probably maybe an average sized man of 5'9" or 5'10", even though he was thin. Um, First off, let me ask you, what was their size difference and their physical appearance? How did that tune into their comedy? And you know, how did it sort of become iconic that even though, other than Abbott and Costello, when you think of comedy teams, okay, there's the Skipper and Gilligan on Gilligan's Island, and there's Ralph and Art Carney on The Honeymooners. But it seems that when people talk about just comedy teams, they think a fat guy and a skinny guy, a big guy and a little guy, and that all comes from Oliver Hardy and Laurel and Hardy rather.
In some ways, I think there's also there are these archetypes in even going back to ancient clowns. I bet there's and whether not the fat guy and the skinny guy, but the guy, and I can't remember the name. There's actually names going back in clown history for the one guy who does the gag and the other guy who reacts. And that was one of the built-in real fateful lucky things, that they're able to be identified immediately because of their physical types. Like you're saying, it's true that Stan Laurel was not a tiny little guy. I mean, he was a normal-sized guy, but he looked small besides the large height of Hardy, not just his fatness or his weight, but he was a big man, and apparently in later years when they were touring around, people would say, "Well, I didn't know how big you are." He would always take that as reference to his weight, but he wasn't just heavy. And in some of the films, actually, through the 30s, he went on these reducing strategies and stuff, and actually he reduced his weight. So in some ways, his look is he's still bigger, but he's not that much heavier, it seems, than Stan in some of the films. And apparently their producer said, "Hey, you better bring the weight back up so the contrast is there." So that was just a lucky charm that they had that made them instantly iconic looking and identifiable all around the world. And they have these different names that they're called in different languages, Scandinavia and French as well. And Dick and Doff are one of the names in Germany, I think. And variations on that. And the names are usually variations on fat and stupid, they call them in these other countries, So that was just a fortuitous thing that, that helped them a lot with their recognition, their brand, as people say. But, they, with Hardy, it brought that sense of him being kind of also like a father to Laurel in some ways, too. But, he's a kindly father that forgives him for his utter stupidity, or in his mind, he's like in their famous tagline, is another nice mess you've gotten us into, but really, watching the film, it's Hardy who gets into the messes just as much as Laurel. He just blames Stan, and so that's an archetype of the scapegoat that we have in society. Stan is always the scapegoat, Anyway.
Well, I mentioned Margaret Dumont in relation to the Marx Brothers, especially Groucho Marx, and there were recurring players in the Three Stooges and even in Abbott and Costello, both on film and their TV show. Who were the 2 or 3 sort of major sort of background players who appeared in a lot of their films, because they always had to have someone to play off of? Were there 2 or 3 actors or actresses that made regular appearances in their films?
Yeah, they had a whole stock company there, the Roach Studios, and it's really funny and really cool in a way, because just as Laurel and Hardy, they used their real names in the films, which I always thought was great, and it kind of like shows their dedication to pure comedy, whatever. And so the same way, a lot of the supporting characters are always using their real names, like Tiny Sanford, the Mr. Sanford, and all this. They're using their. The main guy was James Finlayson, who was a Scottish actor who, at different points, almost seems to be as important. He's almost like a third member of the team. He's not in all of their films, but he's so memorable as a foil. And he had started out wanting to be a solo comedian at Roach, and he had his star eclipsed by this. When Laurel and Hardy hit, they hit really big. So unfortunately, he was just relegated. For him, he was relegated just to being a foil to them. And his whole thing, he had that thing, where he'd have these ridiculous double takes to things. And that, you probably heard the guy from, who does Homer Simpson. He took
Yeah.
that from Simpson,
Ah.
that Joe thing.
Yeah.
And he was one of the main ones. He was the main one. And then you had other people like Charlie Hall, who was a comedian in his own right, and he was but he was also a carpenter at the Rose Studios and a friend of Stan's, and he was like a shorter guy who was a tiny menace to them. And Mae Bush, who was a great actress who a lot of times played Hardy's wife, screaming at them. And other people like Anita Garvin, Tiny Sanford, Walter Long, and they'd have these guys who would always play the tough guy or the tough guy or the villain. And Arthur Houseman, who always, anytime there was a drum to be played, he came in and did it. That's part of the joy of the films too, is that there's this whole stock company of all these characters that are recurring. And Billy Gilbert is another big one that he's not in a lot of their films, but does some pretty amazing performances too.
Well, let's take a break here since we've talked about them and their comedy styles. And in the next segment, I want to talk about some of their most notable shorts and some of the longer films as well. We'll do that in a moment. Speaking with Kip Harness, he's a Laurel and Hardy expert, and we talked a bit about their coming together, their style, the way they were creatures of the screen, and how they differed from some of the other well-known comedy teams. I want to talk about some of their silent films. So a lot of people who grew up watching them on television, like The Little Rascals or Three Stooges, probably didn't even know that they were silent films because they weren't part of sort of the syndication packages of the 50s and 60s. What was some of their 2 or 3 classic silent shorts before the sound era hit?
Well, the big classic that they did was Big Business, which they're selling Christmas trees in California. They come to a house owned by James Finlayson, their main foil, and through a series of incidents, it erupts into a World War where he's destroying their car and they're destroying his house, and that's a great film. And then Liberty is one where they go up on the skyscrapers. They're escaping from prison and they're trying to change out of their from their prison clothes into civilian clothes, and somehow or other they end up on a skyscraper. It's genuinely impressive in the same way Harold Lloyd, they're up on but I like Harold Lloyd climbing up the skyscraper there. They cling like frightened children to the unfinished skyscraper. Two Towers is one. The Finishing Touch is one that is really great. Some of their very first films that they put together that became massive sensations and sort of made them in the early days, Putting Pants on Philip, which is, they're not really playing the Laurel and Hardy characters in it, but sort of getting to the characters. Stan plays a Scottish immigrant who comes over and is wearing his kilt, and Hardy plays his American relative who's like totally embarrassed by his friend wearing a kilt around and tries to get him into a pair of pants. And there's some quite suggestive stuff in that film too, but that's one of their great early ones.
Yeah, I remember that one, yes.
Yeah. It's interesting as well, like you can do these silent films, you can watch them evolving the characters. You can watch it practically in real time. You can watch the evolution of these very, intricate characters.
What's interesting, I was going to mention the film where they tore the car apart, because I didn't off the top of my head know the name of it. And it was interesting that you said it was a silent film, because in my mind I was thinking that it was a sound film. Like I could almost hear them saying, well, but now that I think about it, yeah, it's right, that when they're tearing apart the house and the car, and especially I think Laurel gets really vicious in that film, which is an oddity for his character.
Yeah, he can be a little bit more vicious in some of the early films, but in some of the later films too, he'll kind of awake from his semi-comatose character, and all of a sudden, kick somebody in the ass or get violent, Every so often, he can do something also with great competence out of his incredible stupidity. That's amazing too. But yeah, like those the silent films, and there is a certain purity to some of those silent films, and there's that sense of like really fresh discovery that you can get from them. Like, I mean, Leo McCarey was really a main guy in their developing their characters, and he was definitely the main guy in saying, you know, we gotta get these guys teamed up in those silent films, and he at first, Laurel did not want to be part of a team. Laurel had bad memories of performing on film. He kind of failed as a solo comedian, and he was hoping really to get himself to the security of having a writing and directing career. And so it was Leo McCarey's, you know, it happened at Roach Studios, which is probably would never happen in any other studio than that one that Al Roach had for them to do it in. But Leo McCarey, I think, and Hardy, for a while, was saying, well, do you think there's going to be a team? Like, is this going to work out? He was saying to other people around, you know. Laurel didn't necessarily want it. But as time went on, I think the creative aspect of what was happening with this team, I think in their own way, they thought they wouldn't be so pretentious or presumptuous, I don't think. But in some ways, they felt they found something new. That the slower pace of the comedy, even when they're doing violent stuff, it's done in a very civilized manner. And this felt like there was something new in comedy, and I think that got Stan's kind of creative juices going. Leo McCarey set them up, and after a while, Leo McCarey left the studio. But as the time went on, yeah, you know, so Stan was the creative controller of the team, and yeah, like the slower pace, as they said, was also kind of economical too, because there's less gags that they had to invent, you know. And sometimes they milked it a bit too long. They you know, milk one gag for an entire, you know, 2-reeler short. You know, there's some detrimental things about the style they evolved too. But yeah, as time went on, and the testimony of every person who worked on the films, it was Stan Laurel who basically ran the show. Like, you know, in whatever sense they say of an auteur. I mean, he would not say that he was auteur in that sense, but yeah, all their best stuff. He was at the helm there, and that unique comedy that they forged out of the silent films, the slower pace, and also that more human feeling. They're not otherworldly like Keaton or Chaplin in that way. Of being incredibly dynamic and capable of physical feats. They're these stumbling, bumbling guys, you know. And so the slower pace fits that.
Well, it looks like their first all-sound film, one that just didn't have special effects sounds, was something called Unaccustomed as We Are. Is that their first sound film?
Yeah, and that's it, you know, that's them getting used to the sound format, and it's kind of a rough film. It's not that great. But it's surprising how quickly they do take to it. In the next couple films, they got some real classics already happening in the sound film format. You know, they're smart in terms of using sound, because most people thought it was, and it was, of course, this incredible novelty and et cetera, and so they got on screen, they talk. But Laurel and Hardy got on screen, and they didn't really hardly talk at all. They knew that their format was pantomime, and so, you know, they would use sound where it was appropriate to use it, and they used it. It reflected their characters wonderfully. Stan, by pitching his voice a little bit higher, had that vulnerable kind of little guy sound, and you could hear Hardy's like pompous declarations, you know, a lot better. But they were very smart in how they brought sound in. They just use it for punctuation to their pantomime in an unpretentious way, and it's amazing. Yeah, the first couple films there, the sound films like The Perfect Day and from around that time, Men of War. They're great films. They already kind of got it happening, the sound.
Yeah, I was going to mention Men of War. I was just looking it up, but that's another one that's the famous fight on the lake with the other boaters and whatnot. That's one of those kinds of ones that stick in the mind, like the music box, like the tearing apart of the car in the house. Now, I just wanted to look here. It looks like they had a small part in the Hollywood Review of 1929, and then they had minor roles in something called the Rogue Song and Operetta. I know that they also did, and I want to talk about this a little bit, the Babes in Toyland in 32 or 33, but what was their really first feature then? Was it Babes in Toyland? Was that their first vehicle where they were the stars?
No, their first feature is Pardon Us. And that was one that they had started out as a 2 or 3 reeler, but they found they could add on to it. And then Roach, their producer, kind of, I think because of some sets. Anyway, it just made economical sense to make it out into a feature film. That was their first one. And yeah, like it took them a while to adapt to the feature length thing. I mean, you could say that their stuff was more pure in the shorts, and of course it was, you know. But the features are really enjoyable too, and they had to struggle a bit to get the format of the features up and running. I think Pardon Us is really good. The version that's out on this great DVD set that has all their best stuff from How to Oaks, the Essential Collection. Unfortunately, the version of Pardon Us that's on that is this longer version before they edited it. I'm not sure, but it's that's one of the aspects where you can see Stan Laurel. When you see these other versions of their films that have these added parts, you can really appreciate the editing in the original versions of the films, and you can understand why they were cut down. The version, unfortunately, as a whole thing on that DVD set is a version that's kind of like too long. You know, if you can see the original version of Pardon Us, it's more compact and it's much better. But they had some problems adapting a little bit, and they themselves, I think, always preferred their shorts. But after that, they Pack Up Your Troubles was one where they were serving in the World War I, and they adopted a child who was of their fallen comrade in World War I. And then Sons of the Desert is a great one, where they had the photographs on the form and things. And then there were the later ones, Babes in Toyland, but other ones, operetta-style ones, where it was found to be necessary to insert a straight storyline that they didn't have to handle. They just provided the comedy, and that was a truism of comedy in the 30s. I think they got the idea from Night at the Opera with the Marx Brothers. Those films that had this straight storyline, and then the clowns just come in every so often to help the straight storyline of these really boring lovers along. And it was found that they needed to put those in to attract more of an audience, or supposedly an audience of women to come see the films and make bigger box office. But really, all these years later, we look at these films and we're just struggling and suffering through these terrible romantic subplots, you know, which are of no interest to us whatsoever today. I mean, comedy is the only thing that doesn't age.
You mentioned females, and I was just looking at their filmography, and I see that they had a small appearance in a film called On the Loose with the female comedy team of Zazu Pitts and Thelma Todd, and it's just interesting. I remember the name, and when you think about comedy teams, there's so many comedy teams that were around then, like the Ritz Brothers, who never made it as big as the Marx Brothers, or this female comedy team. Was that a case of the studio putting Laurel and Hardy into their film to try to bring some Laurel and Hardy fans for this female comedy team?
I think to some degree, but at the same time, I think there was a feeling there in the studio everybody was friends, you know, and it was just a fun thing to do. To have Laurel and Hardy guests. They also did a cameo in a Charlie Chase film, and also one of the Little Rascals, or Our Gang, you know, films.
Oh, yeah.
And so they did that sort of thing. I think, aside from maybe the Our Gang, I mean, none of the other shorts at the studio or the series ever really went anywhere, you know. And the guy who was hopefully to be part of our conversation today, Randy Scriptman, he just put up this ultimate Laurel and Hardy book. You know, that's a really awesome book. That's a coffee table size book that's like a coffee table itself. But Leonard Maltin just reviewed it a while ago, And yeah, he was just saying, well, the book also shows that there's a reason why these other short series of shorts at the Roach Studios didn't work out as well as Tom Hardy, because Stan Laurel wasn't there to advise them. You know, he put a lot into the Laurel Hardy series, and yeah, I think the making cameos and the other things maybe it was an attempt to help out because none of them were as successful as Laurel and Hardy at the time.
Well, you mentioned Sons of the Desert, and that's the name of the I guess worldwide the biggest Laurel and Hardy fan club, the Sons of the Desert, and that's considered one of their all-time classic films as well. What did you think that made that film stand out so much above some of the ones that came before? There were some other later films that like Flying Deuces, but this is the one that especially Laurel and Hardy fans have sort of hold up as the masterpiece. Tell me a little bit about that film. Then
Yeah, well, the film's got a really great plot and a really it's really well constructed plot, and it's a similar plot that would be used in countless situation comedies later on. You almost wonder if this is a precursor to some of the situation comedies. Yeah, I mean, actually, the plot, I think, was a little bit stolen from it to use in a honeymooner sequence. But it's the idea of these guys going to collect convention and not telling their wives and becoming entangled in their lies. And it's just really well constructed. But I'll tell you, I mean, that is a classic film, and that is one of their greatest sound features. But it's not entirely, in some ways in my mind, it's not entirely characteristic of their stuff. Like, I can recognize it as being like a really well-formed film and stuff. But for me, my more favorite ones, and I think a lot of the Laurel and Hardy people or Laurel and Hardy fans would say this too. I mean, Sons of the Desert is a great film for maybe not even a person who's deeply into them. But like Royal West and Blockheads, for me, they're films that just preserve their style and are masterpieces. It's sort of like the idea that the sort of thing of like, well, the Sons of the Desert is a good film for just a casual Laurel and Hardy enthusiast, but these other later ones are really great to my mind.
Yeah. Well, I want to talk about probably the most famous film in terms of numbers of eyes that watched it, and that's Babes in Toyland, or as it became known on television, March of the Wooden Soldiers. And just like the Frank Capra film, It's a Wonderful Life, for some reason this fell into the public domain, which allowed it to be played over and over and over again. Every Christmas time growing up as a kid in the 70s on Channel 11, WPIX, there'd be Babes in Toyland or whatnot. And it was played over. It was then infamously colorized. Well, no, it actually was color. No, that's right. It wasn't colorized. Some of their other later films were, but it was in color too. It was an early color film, and I think that this film, which some people have sort of slagged, I think it is really a masterpiece of its own kind, because to me the whole thing is very dreamlike, and the villain of the film, Barnaby, Silas Barnaby, I think it is, tries to lead his boogeymen back over into Toyland, and there's something that's very dreamlike and scary about that film, because like even the little mouse that looks like a Mickey Mouse knockoff, the little pigs, the fact that the boogeymen have that ass flap, to take a dump out of them as an old. I mean, there's some. To me, and tomorrow I'm doing a show on horror, and I think this is, or monsters, this is where the seed of horror is, because as a 4 or 5-year-old, when I first saw that, I was scared shitless by the boogeymen, because unlike these special CG effects you have now, when I've dreamt, and when other people I've talked to have dreamt about horror, something's always a little off. And there's something off about this film in that even the wooden soldiers, when they start their march at the end, they're scary as hell. Talk a little bit about that film, how it fell in the public domain and became probably the best known film to non-Laurel and Hardy fans.
Yeah, it wasn't actually made in color.
It wasn't? Okay, I'm wrong.
No, they've got these colorized versions. They wish they would have made it in color, because it was probably the most ambitious undertaking by the Hal Roach Studios ever.
Yeah.
They're a very small studio. Their success was just making in comedy shorts, 2 real comedy shorts. And for this one, they really planned to go all out, and they did, And there are colorized versions of it, you're saying. And to me, the colorized versions kind of work. I'm not usually a fan of colorized films, but they kind of works in this way because it almost contributes to what you're saying, this kind of off-kilter, dreamlike thing. It works for that particular film, and there are good colorized versions out there. So that's what I've always shown to my kids and stuff like that. I agree with you. As a kid, I saw the film and I was scared. I was scared by the boogeymen, and I was also scared, of the supposed heroes. Because there's one part where the soldiers were going through Toyland and rescuing these little kids to save them from being ruined by the boogeymen. But the soldiers walking around this little girl in his arms, and this goes by a tree, and the limb takes the head off the soldier. Still walking around with no head, and it's just very eerie and strange. And the off-kilter, Disney gave Roach the permission to use Mickey Mouse and the permission to use the Three Little Pigs, which were really a big deal in America at that time. The Three Little Pigs, their version of Mickey Mouse is a monkey dressed up in a little mouse suit, and he looks weird. But that's part of the charm of the film, that you can kind of, they're going all out and they put so much care into it that it is true. And I'm not sure that it did fall. I guess it did fall into the public domain, and they're under all these different names. It is. The whole rigmarole with that, I think, is the Victor Herbert estate owned the rights to the film that was supposed to revert to him after his estate after a certain time. The film was based on a Broadway show that was really, really big. Roach bought the show make this film. The show just was composed of vignettes. There was no apparent plot to it. And Roach wrote this other plot on the train back, and for the film to hook it up. And Laurel rejected it as a plot, and they came up with something else that was more, I think, in tune with the British musical Christmas pantomimes for a plot. And it did create this rift between Roach. As the movies became more expensive, he wanted more control, perhaps understandably so. And Laurel was really big into preserving the characters and not wanting so much interference. And in some ways, he was the one that accounted for the big success of Laurel and Hardy, since he was the one who created, basically the thing. So it was this conflict between the two of them. But that film, it just remains a very charming film, one in which the operetta aspect doesn't seem too intrusive. It's a dreamlike, childlike film that has that sense of horror around the edges as well.
Now, you talked about Way Out West, and that's another classic one. I'm just looking here. They did the short. One of their last shorts was The Fixer Uppers, and that seems to me one that I remember. Let me see what that one was about. Santa helped May Butcher. Nearby car. So after Babes in Toyland, their output became a year or two sometimes between films, and they for the next 20 years or so till their last film, they weren't putting them out at the rate beforehand. Was that just a process of age, or did they sort of suffer towards the end of the Depression? They fell out of favor, because then I think it was 1941 or 42 when Abbott and Costello hit, and that sort of changed the axis of comedy away from the more childlike, if you might call, appeal of Laurel and Hardy.
Yeah, that is true. Well, it's funny because even at the time, they were like acronyms a bit, when they were making their films, because they're kind of a throwback to the silent films in many ways. There's a throwback to the tradition of clowns, of Chaplin and Keaton, who by that time were not really, their careers were kind of over to some degree. Chaplin's case by choice, and Keaton didn't have much of a choice. But so even in their careers, there have always been kind of acronyms, even when they're at their height. As the 30s were on, one reason why there's not so many films is that the shorts were discontinued. Economic factors made the shorts not viable anymore. It was more, what was becoming more fashionable was having double features of features when you went to see a film, and not a feature with a bunch of shorts at the beginning, you know? So shorts were not happening anymore, so they were forced into features, which they were not that happy about, and Laurel was not happy because he knew how hard it was to maintain. It was harder to maintain a form over the performance of a feature film, you know. He preferred the more unpretentious comedy. And so they had their features, and they were a success, I think, up to the end of the 30s. But they left the Roach studio at the time. I guess Laurel felt he could have maybe more freedom in other places. But, you know, in some ways he wasn't aware of the unique atmosphere there at the studio and the time and the space that was given them to create this spontaneous comedy. Because then, you know, they were big names. They went to 20th Century Fox. They came into the movie factory and were just told what to do, and written with scripts that were written by people who had no feeling for their comedy. So they made these 5 or 6 comedies with Fox and MGM that were actually financial successes of them just based on their names. But these films are not really good. You know, they were shoehorned into these plots, and you can kind of tell they're kind of giving up the ghost in these films. Their performances. I mean, Hardy's always kind of turns in a good performance. Laurel looks like he's like medicated or numb from having to do these lousy films where he's not able to exercise his artistic prerogative, you know. So, and then so they did the 4 or 5 up until about 1945. They did these films and with Fox, and then they decided just to kind of give up the ghost because they're not able to do the kind of films they wanted to do. And yeah.
Well, let's talk a little bit then about the two men. Famously, Abbott and Costello never really got along off screen, from if rumors are to be believed, and the Marx Brothers had issues with Chico, especially with his gambling and womanizing, and even the Three Stooges had a little bit of tension here and there between them. But from everything I've ever read, Laurel and Hardy actually liked each other, and they were actually friends off screen until I think Hardy died first. Was it?
Yeah, they seemed to like each other, and they certainly had this perfect kind of union on the camera. And but I think during the time when they were at their best, at their peak, at their commercial highest, and also at their artistic peak, they didn't really spend a lot of time with each other off camera at all. Like they didn't. They were two very, very, very different guys. Hardy liked going out and playing golf and doing all this, you know, physical stuff and gambling and stuff. And Laurel really just his only life was making comedy. I mean, he was paid almost double to what Hardy was paid, because they do a film and they come in every day, and Hardy couldn't wait to get out of there to get to the golf course. He did an amazing job on camera. The one great thing about Hardy and all his performances, every moment he's on the screen, he's there and doing an awesome job. But at the end of the day, he just wanted to get out of there and go have fun. But Laurel put in almost the whole entire other day working on gags for the next film, looking at the dailies, going to test screenings and timing the laughs and editing in response to that. And he was like a workaholic in terms of the comedy. That's what he felt he was here to do, you know. So in that way, it was very serendipitous, because, you know, Hardy wasn't interested in being involved in films, and he wanted to control stuff. Maybe there would have been problems there. But Laurel was. Both of them weren't interested in doing anything.
Well, Laurel also produced a number of their films too, right?
He did. It was kind of a... that was when he was having problems with Roach, and I think Roach kind of gave him... I mean, he probably did have a bit more say-so over those films, over this particular film, and they are a couple of the better films. But it's kind of just a titular kind of recognition of his work, you know, because it didn't say directed by... I mean, according to everybody else who worked on the films, whoever was the nominal director in the film, Stan was actually directing it. You know, he had the last word and the say on everything. Strangely, like, he never really took the credit for that, you know, in the credits, which might have been better if he did, because then he could say, well, our success is due to my control of the stuff. But he wasn't assertive enough, or the manager wasn't assertive enough, and that's how they lost control of their films. But original question was, but
well, let me ask about the legacy of the duo. As I mentioned, you had said that the Fat Man, Skinny Man sort of duo evolved from clown history. Who are sort of what you would call the filmic inheritors of their legacy, if there is any? I mean, are there any comedians today? I mean, because really comedy duos have really fallen out of favor. The last film duo of any measure I can think of would have been the 5 or 6 films that Gene Wilder and Richard Pryor did together, but they had a totally different kind of chemistry. Do you think that that there's an influence either in the style of comedy that Laurel and Hardy had? Is there anyone practicing their kind of gentle humor on screen?
I don't think there is. I mean, to me, in some ways, I think that's why their films maintain this unique flavor to me. Like, I know we're moving into a world where less and less people know who they are, and I don't care really. But like, I mean, but to me, I go back. That's why I go back to their films, because they offer that unique comedy and a unique feeling to their stuff. I mean, just beyond comedy, I just find them interesting films and unique films and a unique take on life. But I don't think that there is, like, you could even say when a bunch of years ago when Jim Carrey did Dumb and Dumber with Jeff Daniels, I thought the first one was kind of fun and a bit of a classic. The second one was horrible, as things usually are. But the idea of these people being so ridiculously dumb, and throughout the whole film. But there's always that element of kind of it's hard to get away from, I guess, in comedy, but an element of nastiness, or an element of like that, to my mind. No, I'm not a wimp, or I'm not a guy who can't appreciate bleak humor, black humor, off-color humor, and everything else. But I just find the unique quality of Laurel and Hardy is that particular type of gentleness, and it's kind of comedy that you can laugh without a bad taste in your mouth afterwards, and it's not based on grossness, like something about Mary where the guy has cum in his hair or whatever, like that. It's a whole different world of Laurel and Hardy.
Well, also they seem to be more comfortable taking their time. Everything is frenetic today. I mean, I can think of a number of films where something would happen. Stan would look, bewildered. Oliver would look at him, go. Mm-hmm. Stan would look at Ollie again. Ollie would look at him again. Then then Ollie would turn to the audience or the camera and look and shake his head, or his bowler might rattle around in his head, look back at it, and the whole thing, there might be an incident, but the funny part was the 40 or 50 or 60 seconds after the thing happened. And today the pace of films just doesn't allow for that.
Oh yeah, totally. I mean, the pace of everything is completely different, and it's like how fast you can get it, how fast you can communicate your thoughts, which are probably not worth having in the first place, or whatever. Everything's like that. And with them, they could go back and forth, the one guy's reaction to the other guy's reaction, like forever. And it's a strange thing. Ricky Gervais often says, he's the greatest fan of Laurel and Hardy, and that his stuff is influenced by their stuff. But I find the same with that. There's a certain element of grace or gentleness that's missing from his stuff. Or there's a certain feeling of sort of meanness or uncomfortableness. And I just feel their dedication to their characters was so complete that it gave their comedy a bit of purity in a way, and there's a subtlety there as well, right? And that works through having two characters that they made intricate over a period of time that grew organically in the films, and it leads to just a special atmosphere, But I think it requires setting your internal time clock to a different time, though, sometimes to watch it.
Yeah.
That's what we're used to.
Well, let's end this segment. In the final segment, I'll give you a chance to wrap up any final thoughts on Laurel and Hardy. We'll do that in a moment. I've been speaking with for the last hour or so with Kip Harness. His website is kipharness.net. I'll link to it below. He also authored a book about a decade ago called The Art of Laurel and Hardy, Graceful Calamity in the Films. And you could find that on his website and also on Amazon. let me just ask you about any final thoughts and the legacy. I know there's like a complete DVD set that came out a year or two ago, maybe a little earlier than that, like 20, 25 DVD set. Um, what would you recommend for, say, someone just interested in finding their work? Obviously, buying that set would probably be a good place to start. But what are the if you had to pick two or three of the shorts and two or three of the feature films, what are their most like elemental, essential works that you would recommend a newbie checking out?
Oh yeah, um, Busybody is the one. I was going to say, yeah, the Music Box is the one they won the Oscar for.
Yeah.
And also that's the one that's cited as the greatest one and everything like that. And kind of when I was a kid, I kind of got tired of that one, and I resisted the idea that it was such a great film. But I find that your opinions about things can change, and I find the Music Box now to be, this great masterpiece. The idea of them pulling that piano up and down the stairs, and I just think it's a great film. It's a great one for newbies, I would say, and the way that they, use that situation to wring a bunch of laughs out of. One of the early sound films shorts. Another one is Hog Wild, which I think is a real classic one that concerns them trying to put up a radio antenna on a roof. And it's just really well constructed. Like a lot of there's early sound stuff. Like one part fits on the other part so well. And other films of the shorts, the sound shorts, I'd say Busybodies and Toad in the Hole. Busybodies is kind of a wonderful exercise in just slapstick, the whole film, where it goes through, and it's just two masters of slapstick doing their thing, laying down their riffs in a musical way. And then Helpmates is another great one too, where they end up destroying an entire house, or Stan destroys his entire house. That's usually cited as another great classic. So any one of those, and you can find them online too. But as well, the features. I love Blockheads, as I was saying. It's like a film about nothing except them doing these routine and slapstick stuff. It's pure love and hungry. And there's even there's something kind of modern, and it's kind of free form as a film. It just came about because Roach needed a loan from a bank, so we needed to have a film production. So he said, okay, can you get a film going? And Laurel got this film going and started making this film to be in production. But because it was done so offhandedly, it kind of just preserves a lot of their best spontaneous comedy and humor. Mm. And Laurel West is great. It's totally integrated into this Western plot. And that's a great one to start out on, too, as a feature. It's fantastic. It's got, them doing a couple of, musical interludes as well, which are really charming. Hardy's got that wonderful voice, and it's got that classic dance scene where they're both dancing in this very serious way to music, and so those are really great. To my mind, any one of those shorts, any one of those features, and they made a lot of other great features too. They have actually, in terms of the films, they made a very high batting average in the terms of the amount of stuff they did. That's pretty top notch. The other features like Jump at Oxford or Ra Diablo, the one we mentioned, Babes in Toyland, they're all our relations, they're all great,
Well, would you agree then that probably the first 6 or 7 years of the sound stuff from the late 20s to the mid 30s, that's really the golden age? That's when they did their best work?
That's the peak, yeah. That they turned out an amazing amount of stuff during that time. That's really high quality. I would even put up to 39 or 40. Like Tap at Sea, their two last features for Roach. It was all the stuff they did at Roach Studios that was great, and that was their peak. They went to those other studios. Some people try to make a case for these later films they did at Fox and MGM. I was trying to watch one of them the other night. That and every so often in some of these films a little bit of the old magic comes through, right? Yeah. But it's just generally not there. Then they retired from the screen and did the music hall tours for the last several years of their lives, and that's when they actually got to know each other more as friends. By this time, they're in their late 50s, and some of these tours were kind of grueling. And they made one final film that is kind of a real oddity, and called Utopia, or Atalke, that was made by the French government along with the Italian and the French governments and movie industries. That was made in France, and the film was supposed to take 12 weeks to make, and it ended up taking 12 months, an entire year. And Stan Laurel was really, really sick, and Hardy looks fatter than ever, almost like a caricature of himself. But in some ways, it captures more of the true Laurel Hardy than those ones that did the big studio, during the 40s to 45. But, you'd never, for sure, never say this is one of their great films, their very final film. But as an oddity, we're talking about the odd aspects of Babes in Toyland. It's interesting film.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you for talking with me. Anyone interested in Kip's book or his other work, I'll link below this video, kipharness.net. And again, thank you for speaking about Laurel and Hardy.
Thank you, Dan. Thanks for having me.